Hi, I don't know about you, but if I were going to take lessons from someone and learn how to do life, it certainly would not be from a prostitute. I would want somebody that lived a life that I would want to exemplify, someone that would show me how to do things the right way. Well, believe it or not, Rahab was a harlot, but yet she got it right. She knew how to live life. What do we know about Rahab? Well, first of all, she was a harlot. And the word translated harlot is correct. The Hebrew word used for this term is the one that's most commonly used for both adulterer or prostitute. But many people who want to remove the stigma from her because she was in the lineage of Jesus, one of his ancestors, want to change it to someone else and perhaps call her a hostess, maybe even a tavern keeper. But the New Testament lets us know that's what she was. Also, hey, Rahab lived among God's enemies. She had faith in Israel's God, which was remarkable in review of her background and her life situations. She had 2 spies. Before invading the promised land, Joshua sent 2 men out to look throughout Canaan and come back with a report. And he said, especially go to Jericho. Then she heard about God. How did she even get knowledge of him and of his divine nature? Perhaps knowledge of the true God was known throughout the world at that time, even though it was mixed a lot with superstition and connected with their idolatry. Or maybe perhaps the spies, in the short time they were with her, instructed her about God, the real true God, who he is, what his character is. Or perhaps, like many today, she had a divine encounter with the true God that let her know that he alone is real. And God is doing that across the world today, speaking to people in dreams, speaking to them in ways that can only be described as a one-on-one encounter. But the reason that we're looking at her today is she was a woman of faith. We may want to judge her for her profession, but God sees her differently. He sees her as a righteous woman of faith. She not only received 2 spies with hospitality required of the day, but she also defended them when her very life could have been in jeopardy. She had a firm belief that they were what they professed to be, that they were people of God, and she was willing to identify with them. Well, let's look at this story. It's found in Joshua chapter 2, and it takes up the entire chapter. In the first verse, Joshua sent out 2 men to spy secretly, saying, go and view the land, especially Jericho. So the 2 men went out to Jericho, and they were divinely guided to a place that was not unusual for strangers and even foreigners to go, to a Canaanite harlot's house. And there, 2 unknown people, even if they were spies, would not seem too unusual because there was so much traffic going through this harlot's house that would provide information on the local situation. But there's one thing about free information. Everybody has access to it. Everyone knew who came and went. And so verses 2 and 3 tell us that there were no secrets in Jericho. Word got back to the king of Jericho, and he sent messengers to Rahab's house saying, bring out those 2 guys that are in your house. Well, she says, well, I don't think so. And she tricked them. She said, And verses 4-6, and the woman took the 2 men and hid them. Then she said, yes, the men came to me, but I didn't know who they were, where they were from. And it happened as the gates were being shut, when it was dark, the men went out. Where the men went, I do not know. Pursue them quickly, for you may overtake them. But she had brought them up on the roof and hidden him. Rahab protected the spies by sending the king's men on a futile chase. She said they were seen leaving the city when the gate was being closed. Now, this was an unmistakable deception because she had hidden those 2 Hebrews on her roof. She lied to protect the spies. Now, we are no more obligated to support her actions than we are those of King David or even Peter, who lied. But Scripture praises Rahab not because she lied, but because of her faith. And we should honor Rahab the same way the Bible does, as a great heroine of the faith. God does not condone sin, but Rahab not only was pardoned, but she was given a position of honor. She married into the Israelite family. She was an ancestor of the Messiah. And she also is listed in Hebrews in the Hall of Faith. God forgives sin and changes the life of the sinner. Rahab had faith, and it was evident in Joshua 2, verses 8-11. Rahab went to the men that she had hidden, and she made a very bold statement. I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the people, all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. This reveals the panic that the Canaanites were under. God had dramatically delivered the Israelites in so many different ways, and reports of that had spread all the way to Jericho. Rahab had formed strong convictions based on the knowledge of God's promise and the miracles that led Israel to the land. Hearing of Israel's success caused terror in the inhabitants of Jericho, who were shut up inside of the city, and they thought, I've got all these high walls to protect me. But in spite of that, it says their hearts melted from fear, indicating that their breath was taken away by God's great acts on behalf of the Israelites. On that basis, Rahab decided that their God alone was the one true God. And Rahab voiced her faith in a statement so strong when she says, I know that the Lord has given you the land. Use of God's personal name, Lord, indicates faith in the living God. She didn't say, I know that a God has given you the land. I didn't know some God has given you. No, she says, I know that the Lord. And when she used his name that he was known by so much in the Old Testament, she was saying, I know who he is. I recognize his power. I recognize his personal character. And it was just underscored by this dramatic statement that he is the God of heaven above and the earth beneath. She affirmed God's sovereignty over heaven and over earth, and she acted on that belief in a decision to seek refuge in him. She made a life-changing decision. And it's one thing just to have faith, but when that faith comes in and it changes your life in such a way that you're willing to act upon it and let it make a difference, then it becomes real. This was an example of God's grace at work. Salvation was not based on her character or on her merits. See, she lived in a doomed city. She practiced a condemned profession, and she falsified her actions. But still, God's grace was at work. It was faith in God alone that saved her, and she acted in in evidence of that faith by helping the spies at the risk of her own life. It took great faith for one living among the Canaanites to believe in the power of the God of Israel, and also in the right of the Israelites to possess the land of Canaan. Her faith and her actions in response to the reports that she heard of God and his works have become a model for Christians today. As we look at what she did, it lets us know that we too have the right and the responsibility to move ahead based on what we believe about God. And so what does she do? In verses 12 through 14, she makes a covenant. She is convinced of God's supremacy, and she therefore made a stipulation with the spies for the preservation not only of herself, but of her relatives amid all the danger of the approaching invasion. This attests to the sincerity and the faith of her, and the strength of her faith. Rahab learned from the spies or elsewhere that all the inhabitants of Jericho were doomed. And she made those spies enter into a covenant to save herself and her family. And she asked the Lord she asked the spies to swear by the Lord as an indication that she acknowledged the true God and knew that an oath in his name was the most serious obligation that any Jew of that day could enter into. Now, this could have been a deal breaker. She had faith. She was willing to put it all on the line. She was willing to rescue the spies, but they had to be willing to do something for her. They had to enter into a covenant with this woman who was living in the city that they were sent to spy on. They were to make a covenant with a woman who was one of the people that God had commanded them that should not live. They were to make a covenant not knowing that they had the ability to even fulfill the terms of that covenant. But the men answered anyway. They answered, "Our lives for yours. If none of you tell this business of ours, it shall be when the Lord has given us the land that we will deal kindly and truly with you." By having her enter into her part of the covenant, saying, "You can't tell anyone," they made her life depend on secrecy, lest she would be tempted to betray them after they were gone and have second thoughts. Or maybe she'd be tempted to say, they were sent here because the Israelites are coming, and to tell all the plans of Israel. But with her life at stake and that of her family, she was willing to agree. While Rahab could ensure safety for the men, how could she know that they would ensure her safety? This required a new kind of faith. Letting them go was something that Rahab could do and something that she had control over. And Rahab, she was a businesswoman. She had already dealt with the king's men and showed how shrewd she was. But now these men, whom she'd only met a few hours ago, are asking her to do something different. And believing that they would follow through with their promise, or even had the power to keep their promise, brought faith to a whole new level. How about you? What would you do if your life were hanging in the balance? If these were men that told you they would save you, but you don't know if they had the ability to do that? And not only that, how do you know they wouldn't turn against you? That's what she was facing. And she had no concrete evidence of that. She had no basis to hope for that. So what did she do? She put her hope, she put her confidence, not just in the words of these men, but she put her hope and her confidence in the God whom these two men served. And what she had learned of the character of God caused her to believe that if these men followed the one true God, that their character would be following after his character. And as she saw their actions, it would only exemplify his actions. And that's the faith that she had. And that's why she followed through. The city gates had been shut at dark. There was no way for them to escape. They couldn't go down the streets of the city. And even if they did, as we said, the gates were shut. The only way out was through her window. Now, to have a window on the wall meant that's where the house was. And a house being built on the wall of the city would be a humble dwelling. But it would be just the spot for a poor prostitute, and just the spot for God to demonstrate his grace. God comes in at the most unexpected, at the poorest condition, at the least likely place, and gives an example of his grace. That example of his grace is found in the Scarlet Thread, chapter 2, verses 15 through 21. Finally, the men say, "We will be blameless of this oath, unless when we come into the land, you bind this line of scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you bring your father, mother, brothers, and all your household into your house." The spies told Rahab to hang the line of scarlet cord by which she lowered them down to the ground as a sign of the covenant between her and them. Its red color was very conspicuous to anyone passing by, but it was a pledge of safety to Rahab's house, just as the bloody mark on the lintels of the doorpost of the Israelites had been a sign of safety to the Israelites when they were leaving Egypt. This scarlet thread became a lifeline for Rahab, the same as it had to Israelites in the past. Many say the scarlet thread represents the line of the blood covenant, which began in the Garden of Eden. It was exemplified in the Passover, and it was fulfilled in Christ's sacrifice. This red cloth hung out of her window was a sign of her faith in which she and the spies had agreed, and it was a means of deliverance for both Rahab and for her family. In Rahab's day and in ours, profession or a pretense of faith without works just is not enough. If Rahab had said to the spies, I believe the God of heaven and earth has given you this whole land to possess. I believe who he is. But I dare not take a chance on letting you escape or showing you any kindness in this city. If she had said that, it would have only been dead faith. But her faith was strong enough that she did something, though she would experience danger for harboring the spies if anyone ever discovered her actions. The people of Jericho were strong, and they might even be safe within the walls of their city. But she believed in God, and God honored the faith of Rahab before all. When Jericho was destroyed, Rahab's faith was recognized as Joshua gave the command to save her and her household, though all the inhabitants of Jericho were to be slain. Believing in God and believing his powers, she left her Gentile family and to be incorporated into the people of Israel. Later, Rahab married the prince of Israel, one of the princes, and became the second mother-in-law to Ruth. She was an ancestor of King David, and she's listed in Matthew's genealogy of Christ. God often uses the faith of the worst of sinners, including a prostitute, to show us his divine grace. Faith must justify itself by works and its results. Rahab, yes, she was a Gentile, but she was also a convert. She chose God over her own safety. Her actions might have dangerous consequences, but to demonstrate her faith, she overlooked all the threats. She was confident that God would give Israel future success, and she wanted to be a part of that. She acknowledged what was in the past. God has done great things. God has been a deliverer in the past. God has created the heavens and the earth. God has been faithful through it all. She believed what was present. The city's strong, but God is stronger. God sent these two men to me that I might have a way of escape. And she foretold what was to come. She said, everything's going to be destroyed, but with God's help, if you will help me, I can be preserved. My family can live. We can all make it. And that's the same way with us. When we acknowledge what God has done for us in the past, and he has done so much. Oh, he looked at our life when we were just like Rahab, when we were the worst of sinners. And he saved us. And then we believe what's present. Oh, regardless of how circumstances are, regardless of what's going on in the family, in the world, his word is true, and he's going to see that we survive, because we're going to foretell what's to come, and that is a glorious hope. Because if in this life we have hope, we are of most men most miserable. But he said, no, you have a glorious hope and future. And we can be like Rahab. Rahab was not perfect. She did some things that cannot be defended. But Rahab had strong faith. And that is all that God requires from any of us.